What is up, Nets fans? Welcome to the Brooklyn Buzz. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Jac Manuell. Jac, what's up?
Caris LeVert time.
Yes, I'm pumped. Caris LeVert season preview coming up. Obviously, we completed Kyrie Irving already. If you want to check that out, hit up iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, NetsRepublic.com, Google Play, and YouTube. Also, you want to cop a Brooklyn Buzz tee, head to Design Tree /Off the Glass. Use OTG5 as a discount code. Save yourself $5. But let's dive into Caris LeVert, who had a really interesting season. And, you and I were talking about it was pretty much a three-part season. Had the pre-injury where he was kind of coming on the scene, looked like most improved candidate, then the recovery period, and then the back to the rise, which we saw in the playoffs. So regular season numbers, 13.7 points per game, 3.8 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 42% from the field, 31% from three, and that was in 40 games. But the postseason numbers, a lot better, 21 points per game, 4.6 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 steal, almost 6 free throws a game, almost 50% from the field, and 46% from three.
Yeah, I mean, those postseason numbers are outstanding, Nick. And I think that when we saw that, I know I left America, I think around game 4 or game 5. And I remember watching at LAX just the form that Caris was showing and that confidence. And I think confidence has always been a big thing for him. And I think that that postseason performing on the biggest stage is going to hold him in good stead. And it's why, the Sean Marks rewarded him with that 3-year contract. And, it might have been a discount, but it is also life-changing money for a guy like him. And life-changing money in general. So his form, and like you said, the 3-part sort of season, pre-injury, he was averaging 18.4 points, 3.7 assists, and 4.3 rebounds. I think we'll eventually get to, our stats prediction. But then it was obviously post-injury when he sort of struggled a little bit. We saw the difficulty with the bobblehead night. I remember popping on to Twitter and you have your personalized sort of trending. And it just had the Caris bobblehead and said, Brooklyn Nets player gets 0 points in his bobblehead night. I'm like, at least call him by his name. I say Caris LeVert. It's just like Brooklyn Nets players. Twitter wants me to be click-worthy. But yeah, that I think it was just such a dramatic season in so many ways, with the injury, with the ups and downs, with sort of putting himself on the scene, the game winners. As preparation a couple of days ago, I was listening to the season review where we had Will on, and it's sort of like, oh yeah, this is what happened. I remember all this stuff, and I was just like, wow, it was such a whirlwind season for Caris LeVert. But now, I think the best thing is that he's going into an off-season with some consistency, with some good chemistry with the stars on the new stars on the roster, and hopefully he gets up to another really good start to the season.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, it was just such a weird season, that injury. And, we thought at the time of it that he'd be out for the season for sure. And I think it was such a, a great thing for him and his confidence and the confidence in his body to come back last year and be able to kind of find his groove in the regular season. Then by the time the postseason came, he was able to kind of get back to that level we saw earlier in the year. So really a lot of resiliency from him, because most players, if they get an injury like that, there's a good chance you won't see them that season, or you won't see them perform at a high level. And I think it'd be easy to say in the postseason he was the Nets' best player.
Oh, he was easily the Nets' best player. I think that D'Angelo had his moments. Spencer was good. Ed Davis, when he was healthy, was tremendous. But Caris LeVert really put his foot down and was like, I'm going to lead these guys and really sort of step up. And, he earned the minutes. He showed flashes in that game 1, and then he sort of just took it with him and he just ran with it. And I think that the best players, I say this quite a bit on the pod and, on general NBA pods like JBT and The Outlet, the best players step up in the biggest moments, and the biggest moments are in the clutch time and in the playoffs. And you make a name for yourself there. I'm pretty sure that that's some sort of marketing campaign that NBA or NFL or whatever sport has had. This is where names are made. This is where, dreams are made. This is where history is made. And Caris LeVert's already done it. So I think that the Nets make the postseason next year. Caris LeVert's going to have another big one. But, we're looking forward to the regular season, the preseason, and what he can do, what he can improve, and we're going to go nice and deep into that one.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jac, before we move on to the next season, success or disappointment last year?
Oh, it was success. Obviously, you can look at it in any way you want, but, I think if you're looking at it just from a plain, simple perspective, he came back from a pretty devastating injury. Obviously, it wasn't as devastating as we thought. I remember it was probably the most depressing Brooklyn Buzz we'd ever done following that Timberwolves game. I remember we were just so down. But the fact that he could get back from it and show, like you said, sensational playoff form, it can't be anything but a success. There'll be people that'll argue that's like, oh, he only played 40 games. Well, the quality of those 40 games that he was out there, and for me, the quality of the 5 games in the playoffs. If he had have just played those 5 games in the playoffs at that standard after injury, I would have considered it a success almost.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, if he didn't get back to the level we saw early in the year, I could see someone saying it's a disappointment because of the injury. But the fact is he got back to playing at a really, really high level in the postseason, super efficient. I think you really just can't call it a disappointment. So definitely a success for me. But let's talk about some of the strengths of Caris LeVert's game.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued. When I start with strengths, I'm always intrigued to hear what you come back with. But I've got, we're obviously going to overlap. I've got driving, I've got his footwork, pacing, creating space, passing in the pick and roll and down low, his defensive acumen, his ability to read passing lanes as a defender, creating his own shot in general, his assist percentage. So I went on cleaning the glass and took a look at some advanced stats. His assist percentage, so the percentage of teammates that made shots on his assists, so was in the 95th percentile. So the quality of his passing and forcing opponent turnovers, he's in the 87th percentile. So I think that in terms of reading the passing lanes, we know that he's our best defender. I did the defensive breakdown for netsrepublic.com, and I'm just really excited. It's weird because I'm almost more excited to see what he can do as a defender next season than as an offensive player, which is an odd thing to say.
Yeah, and it's you forget about it because I think you look at the offensive numbers and they really popped off. But if you go back to look at that pre-injury, there were some really big moments for him defensively against some really good guards in the NBA. And like you said, the active hands really stick out. He's one guy in the nets that gets the deflections, and that's what you want defensively, disrupt the other team. But I mean, you covered a lot of them. I'm just going to go through my whole list, and like you said, there'll be some overlap. So driving ability, creating interior passing, pick and roll play, pull up three, finishing through contact and contorting his body. His handles are very good. He'll drop players every once in a while. Active hands defensively, on-ball defense. I think he's a team player. He's a guy that everybody on the team really likes, and I think people kind of forget about that, and we'll talk about that more later. His crossover is nice. You mentioned the footwork is disgusting. His pump fake game is really good, and I think we think D'Angelo Russell, like that pump fake game is disgusting, but Caris has some nice pump fake game, especially in that in-between area. Not the mid-range, but not a layup, so he's good in that area too. And his ability to kind of score on some of the best in the game, and then also that hesitation move and then the sneaky speed. We probably missed something, but I think we got most of it.
I mean, someone please hit us up on Twitter if we forgot something. We covered literally almost all facets of Caris LeVert's game. But, the thing I wanted to touch on before we move on to his weaknesses, Nick, was that pull-up three. Another video breakdown I did for Nets Republic was on that three-point shot because, we'll be getting to the improvements and such, and we'll obviously touch on it. But that is his best form of the three-point shooting. Now, that pull-up three from the top of the arc, that's where he looks smoothest. That's where his shot mechanics look best. And going back throughout the entire season, looking at the playoffs, looking at the regular season, he looks most comfortable taking that pull-up three. And obviously, most players are better off to catch and shoot, but it'll be interesting to see how that pull-up three continues and how the percentages increase. And I guess it sort of leads nicely into the weaknesses and improvements.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, confidence is a big part of Caris's game, and you can tell the confidence in the pull-up three compared to the spot-up three. And like you said, getting to the weaknesses, one of them is the spot-up three. What else do you got weakness-wise, though?
Yeah, so three-point shooting, I have free throw shooting, which I think is correlated. You look at I think I said this on JBT yesterday when I was talking about Giannis Antetokounmpo with Nick, and we were talking about his three-point shooting. If you're a 80% plus three-point shooter, there's probably a high likelihood that you are going to be a 38% or above three-point shooter. Stephen Curry, Patty Mills, Kevin Durant, these guys shoot like 90+% from the free throw line. And Caris LeVert, was under 70%. And I know that's a number that I would like to get a lot higher. And I think when we talk about a stat prediction, if it does, I think that's going to be reflective in his three-point shooting as well. I think that correlation has been made plenty of times by plenty of NBA experts. In terms of his scoring, I think just becoming more of an effective scorer. His effective field goal percentage was poor last year. And I think, you look at stats with a grain of salt, but to be under 50% in the effective field goal percentage at 47.8%, it is poor. It's subpar, and it needs to be better. As a career, he's not even at 50% either. I think that hitting his free throw shots, hitting a few more threes, is naturally going to bring that to around the 53-55% mark. And that's an easy way of doing it. You hit your free throws, it naturally adds to your effective field goal and true shooting percentage. Obviously, you judge stats as a whole, but I think that, looking at him as an effective scorer, those two little things can really help him, because we know how good he is at driving. We know how good he is at creating space and pump faking, all those little things. He just needs to improve those two parts of his game as a scorer, and he's going to probably improve dramatically.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of that too is some of the numbers being post-injury. If you look at his pre-injury numbers, I think the free throw percentage isn't quite as bad, and obviously the effective field goal percentage isn't as bad because his field goal percentage before he got injured was around 47 or 48%, so it was really high. It's really tough to gauge his season from last year because of the ups and downs, and there was games when he came back from injury he was bad. He wasn't good. He was trying to still find his rhythm, but I agree. I think the free throw percentage definitely can be higher, especially for a guy like I mentioned, got to the free throw line almost 6 times a game during the postseason. So if you're going to be there a lot, you need to make those free throws. Obviously, spot-up three-point shooting is going to be huge, especially with the personnel that the Nets have now, having a Kyrie Irving and a Kevin Durant in the future. You're going to need to hit those spot-up threes in the corner, on the wing, whatever it may be. And then obviously, I think durability is something that's a concern. He's been banged up. Obviously, last year was kind of a freak injury, but there's been little injuries here and there.
Yeah, and before touching on that, pre-injury, his free throw percentage was at 72%. So a decent enough number, obviously not
He
amazing.
should be 80, though. I think 80 is what you expect out of a guard.
I think it is, but even like D'Angelo Russell was at like 78%. So I think that's what it should be. Caris LeVert is this weird sort of in-between player, and we'll talk about more position sort of stuff later. But in terms of durability, he was drafted so low because of his injury history, because of the injury worries surrounding him. And obviously, we talk about the Nets training staff and the fact that for the most part, he's been healthy. It's the freak injuries that have happened. So if those freak injuries, you take those out, I think Caris LeVert is a relatively healthy player. Hopefully,
last season, 71 games, which I think is a good number. Everybody misses a couple games for an ankle sprain or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think 70-plus games it should be an aim of most players. I think that it's almost futile and almost risky to try and play 82 games. Obviously, that's the goal at the end of the day. You want to be healthy for as long as possible, but you also want to manage your body and be peaking at the right points. And obviously, we know how risk averse the Brooklyn Nets training staff are and how careful they are in that sort of respect. But yeah, I think hopefully injuries and three-point shooting, all those things come together. But it'll be interesting to see if all those things come together. He's almost going to become, he's going to be the guy, the second, third guy on the Brooklyn Nets, and it's going to make things so much better for him. But some of the questions that we get from the listeners, they're going to be fun to address as well, and they sort of touch on what we've been sort of hinting at a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, the spot-up shooting and the shooting from three to free throw, whatever it is, this is how he becomes a complete player, and that's just going to be huge for Kenny Atkinson because we know about the top two guys on the team in KD and Kyrie. So, but what areas do you want to see him improve this season other than shooting?
Yeah, I think that the things we sort of touched on, and this is sort of tying in how the team can help him. And I'm going to steal an idea that you said on his season review podcast, was utilizing him in some more cutting actions.
That's what I have on my list right now too.
I knew it. Well, you said it like 2 months, or it was May or something, so a couple of months ago. But then also continuing to play him with second units and alongside Jared Allen, because they have that embedded chemistry. We know how good they are in the pick and roll together. Just guys in general that there's chemistry with. We know he's got off-court chemistry with Spencer Dinwiddie. Didn't really look too much into the numbers with Spence of that sort of two-man lineups, but I know he didn't have a great sort of chemistry with D'Angelo Russell. It wasn't amazing. And then obviously surrounding him with shooters so you can utilize his passing. And then DeAndre obviously getting him some space as a screener so he can hit that pull-up three and then he can hit hard into the lane. And we know how he hits Jared Allen as a lob threat. I think DeAndre could certainly be positive for him there too.
Yeah, you pretty much covered everything. Obviously you want to see the improvement off ball. I think the off ball movement needs to improve in terms of cutting, but also if he improves as a spot up shooter, it's just going to create more space for the other players in the Nets. And then, like you said, how the team can help. I think let him work sometimes too. We know he's really good in isolation situations. If he's hot, let him get some work in. And like you said, with DeAndre being there, you have DeAndre and Jared Allen. Pair him up with those guys because that way he has a pick and roll partner. We know last year Ed Davis, not necessarily an above the rim threat, still had some success with Caris, but not as much as a guy like DeAndre could possibly have. And like you said, you obviously want shooters out there. Anytime anyone can operate in the pick and roll or is a really good ISO driver, you want to give them space, and that's what Caris can do.
Yeah, definitely. I think, verticality. We've got two centers on the roster that have, are really quality in that sort of area, and I think that that ties in nicely with, our three ball handlers who really know how to work the pick and roll, create space for themselves, but also be able to give the pass off when it's known, when it's called for. Caris certainly does it, Spencer certainly does it, and Kyrie certainly does it, even though he's much more proficient and effective scorer.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how Caris translates some of the game that we saw at the end of the postseason, specifically in Game 3 and Game 4, into this season, because there was moments that he looked like he was a pure star. Some of the moves early in that Game 4 game were ridiculous.
Yeah, it's certainly obviously probably one of the number one questions that we got was like how he's going to work alongside Kyrie, and how does that stunt his development at all? Does Kyrie taking more touches from him? But we'll get to his usage. We'll get to those questions in more depth a little more later in the episode.
So obviously, I don't think I have to ask this, but starter or bench player, obviously a starter for me.
It's starter, but like I sort of said, in terms of utilizing him, I want to see him play with the second units, because if Jared Allen's out there as a backup center, if Rodions is coming off the bench, Caris has chemistry with those guys, and we saw him for large chunks of last season, the season before, him really dominate as a player with the second units, and staggering those minutes a little bit, I think is something that can be really positive. And lead to him being more effective as a player, because we know how well he did, like you said, last season with the ball in his hand as an ISO scorer, as a player who could just dominate and solidify himself as like a star by himself.
Yeah, and I think the great thing, hopefully Kenny does, is to stagger the minutes. You have Kyrie, you have Spencer, and you have Caris, all guys you want to get the ball a lot. You're playing Kyrie and Caris, you sub one of them out, you bring Spencer in, then you sub the other guy back out, and then you put the third one in. So I think there should be time for him to play with the first unit and the second unit. But minutes-wise, where do you think he sits?
I'm going... This isn't conservative because he hasn't averaged this ever in his career, but I'm going to go 30 minutes a game. I think before the injury, I'm looking at the numbers. He averaged 29 or so minutes per game. So I think that it's probably around that number, 29.7. So I think 30 minutes a game. It's going to be interesting because I think Kenny's going to be forced to play some of these guys longer than he has in the past. Like I said on the previous Kyrie episode, only Joe Harris and D'Angelo Russell average above 30 minutes. But you can't be giving that little of minutes to guys like Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and even Caris LeVert. If he's now sort of this star guy, I think Caris LeVert, 30 minutes for me is a conservative number, but I think he could get as high as 33. But I'll probably stick to the lower end because I know how Kenny works.
Yeah, I'm going to go with 33, actually, because I think there's going to be an interesting role for Caris, and you hinted at it earlier. He's going to play a lot of minutes at shooting guard, but I think he's going to be forced to play a decent amount of minutes at small forward as well because of the limitations of the roster with the suspension of Chandler and then obviously the situation with Rodions.
Yeah, and I'm going to save the stat for the question a little bit later in the pod, but looking up his on Basketball Reference, the time, what they considered time spent at the 2, spent at the 3, and even at the 4, it was pretty illuminating. And I'm teasing on a podcast, which is weird, but wait in here. It'll probably be about 5 or 10 minutes away, guys, and you'll find out the wonderful stat.
What is the usage rate you have for Caris next year?
I'm going 25%.
That's what I have too, 25. I think he was right around 24 last year. Obviously, a little jump in the playoffs makes sense. But what do you got for stat line?
So stat line, I'm going 17 points, 4.2 rebounds, 5 assists, 1.3 steals, 34% from 3, 44% from the field, and 72% from the free throw line, which was, again, like we touched on, what he averaged before the injury.
So I went with 18 points per game, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 46% from the field, 36% from 3. I'll go free throw. I'll go with 73. And I think I'll average like 1.8 steals, maybe even possibly 2, because I think that's going to be an area where he has to capitalize on. If you want to be a really good defensive player, you get the deflections. Now it's kind of translating that to a full season.
Before we move on, Nick, I think this is probably an interesting question, just talking about that. And I think you bringing up that steal number. What is the number that you want to see jump the most, or you want to see be effective the most? Is it the scoring? Is it the rebounding? Is it the three-point percentage? Is it the steals? Is it the free throw percentage? We've spoken a lot about all the improvements we want him to make. If you could only pick one in terms of his box score stat line, what's the one you want to see jump the most?
I think three-point percentage. I think three-point percentage will separate him as a player, because then he becomes incredibly difficult to defend, because now he's able to hit you with a pump fake at the three-point line. We already know he's a great driver, has the poise to kind of work in between and hit some of those floater shots as well. So if he's able to knock down a three-point shot consistently on spot-ups, he's putting a ton of pressure on the defense and also helping the Nets offense and making his teammates better.
Yeah, I think that it seems like a cop-out answer, but it's I think it's probably the right answer. If you're given A, B, C, or D, you're taking that one. But I'll go with something different just to just to change it up. I'll go with that steal number. If that steal number is 1.8 to 2 steals, then he could be an all-defensive caliber player and really elevate the Nets as a defensive team, which was surprising because last year we were a better defensive team than offensive team, and a lot of that was because of the acumen and capabilities that Caris LeVert showed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of the steal numbers and the defensibility will almost depend on his teammates and how much they're able to score. If he has a decent load offensively, then obviously you're not going to be able to translate as much defensively.
Yeah, it's all about the energy transfer, I guess.
Exactly. Having some balance, obviously, when you're an elite player, it doesn't really matter quite as much. Maybe Caris will be at that level this year. We're yet to see. But where will Caris be at the end of the season in terms of like shooting guards in the East?
Yeah, so I sort of looked at when we chatted about it on the season review, we talked about top 10 sort of range or whatever. I think because Caris isn't like a true sort of shooting guard or true sort of guard in that sort of sense, I looked at it more as him as like a third option. What could he be in terms of we're looking at like the best third options in the league? You look at like Draymond Green or Klay Thompson. Obviously, Klay's probably number 2 now. For me, Caris LeVert can establish himself by the end of this season as one of the premier third options on the team. If you're the premier third option, third best player on a championship level team, then you are doing very well for yourself. And I think I looked at also his all defensive sort of capabilities. I think that if he's in that all defensive sort of conversation, there are some great guard defenders and great sort of wing defenders and utility defenders in this league. Jimmy Butler, Drew Holiday, Victor Oladipo. If Caris LeVert can elevate himself to even near that conversation, then I think he's going to be having a tremendous season.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially you mentioned being the third player, and if you're the third best player and you're a complete guy and you can play both ends of the floor, it is so helpful for the team on so many different levels, especially the head coach and Kenny Atkinson.
Yeah, I think that it's almost underrated. I think team composition, you obviously the number one thing you want is to have that superstar, those superstars at the top. You Kevin Durant, your Kyrie Irving, but then you need the roster composition under them. You need the role players. You look at the Clippers, you look at the Raptors from last season, you look at the Warriors in their really strong heyday. They had real depth. Even the Cleveland Cavaliers, when LeBron was dominating, and LeBron continues to dominate, but LeBron was dominating in Cleveland, he had some good guys coming off the bench like J.R. Smith, all these sort of guys who are able to contribute capably. And I think it's almost the next best thing. You want to have the best talent, but you also want the gap between your second and third player, second best player and third best player, not to be absolutely dramatic. And obviously, Kyrie Irving is, a top 10 player in the NBA. Caris LeVert's probably top 50. I think we had about 44 around that range, 49, sorry, for OTG Basketball's top 50. But he is still, as a third best guy, one of the best in the league if he has a good season.
Yeah, no, I agree, Jack. And we've talked about it a lot in the buzz, and it's been a topic for a lot of Nets Twitter and Nets media. Caris is possibly the guy that can take the Nets from being contenders to being a possible dynasty down the line because of that potential he has to be a star in this league. But Jack, you got a big question for me on Caris before we get into the Twitter questions?
Yeah, so for me, we've touched on it a little bit, Nick. Can Caris get over his health issues to have a sustained run of success individually? We've seen it in spurts, and we saw it in a really a high-level spurt at the start of the season. For me, like you said, if he can play 70 games of what he was doing pre-injury, then that question is put to rest.
Yeah, I think he can. I think he's a guy who's committed to taking care of his body. And like you mentioned earlier, one of the best medical teams in the league, and they kind of play things safe. I think he can have a really successful, healthy season.
Yeah. Did you have one?
I kind of twisted it into the top 5 because I had one related to 3-point percentage, but we pretty much dove that down.
Done.
So let's dive into some of these Twitter questions. I know we got a good chunk for today.
We have plenty, and I was very happy that people are responding, people are listening. So thank you to everyone that did respond. And we'll start off with Tyler Galante at Tyler J. Galante. How do you think his defensive ability can and will improve playing with Kyrie and KD?
And kind of touching on something I just hinted at, if he's able to kind of lessen his offensive workload and focus more defensively, I think he should be able to improve in that area almost, I wouldn't want to say dramatically, but a higher effort level consistently every possession.
That's essentially how I think he's going to improve, purely because of the fact that the load on him offensively won't be as burdensome, that it will allow him to be really, really locked in on the defensive end, and playing against the likes of Devin Booker and James Harden, and really looking on those guys, because we know how taxing it can be. And when you look at some of the best defensive players in the league, they're almost pure defensive players and sort of spot-up shooters. You look at Patrick Beverley, these sort of types. Whereas Caris LeVert, because he has such a tremendous offensive skill set, it's hard to sort of be engaged for the full sort of 30, 35 minutes that you're out on the floor. But guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, guys like Kawhi Leonard, these sort of superstars, obviously the coaching around him will be important as well. How they sort of manage that. If they want Caris to be taking those late game defensive possessions against the sort of stars, you don't want to really tire him out too much in the early points of the game. So I think it's going to be on the coaches too. But playing alongside Kyrie and KD, there's just going to be so much less emphasis on him to be a tremendous offensive player, which is why I was a bit conservative in the numbers for him. And hopefully those guys will just allow him to be more effective with the same amount of usage. So I think for me, it's just about the time that he'll have to be more defensively engaged.
Yeah, and you can even think about it too, like this is offensively, things just might be easier because the team has more talent. There just won't be as much attention on you if Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are on the floor.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll move on to OTG Ryder, UK Clipper. Really love the question. It's a good one as well. And I think we've touched on it a little bit at UK Clipper. What will be deemed a successful season, Caris, and what's his expected elevation?
I think, a successful season will kind of be around the numbers that we put out there. We want to see the scoring kind of be where he was pre-injury. And I think expectations and kind of the elevation that we want to see from him is kind of somewhere in between pre-injury Caris and postseason Caris. You don't want to necessarily expect him to put those postseason numbers up throughout an 82-game season because they were extremely efficient. But if he's able to kind of get in between, somewhere between that pre-injury and those postseason numbers, I think that'd be really successful. And that'd be kind of the elevation I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Nick. And I'll probably, shorten it down to something pretty sort of simple. If he's healthy, if he's playing 70 games, I think that we're going to see some sort of success from him. And for me, that if Caris LeVert is healthy for 69 games, 70 games plus, then that's going to be a successful season, because I think we are going to see those natural improvements, because we know how motivated he is. We know that if his body's healthy, he's going to be confident in his body, because obviously when he was coming back, you could just see that he was tentative, and he had every reason to be, because you don't necessarily have that trust in your body yet. You're going out there in the same arena, same setting where you did that injury, and obviously there is going to be hesitation. So if Caris is healthy, I think we're going to see the elevation in all the sort of areas we talked about: the 3-point percentage, the defensive numbers, the effectiveness as a scorer. So if he's healthy and that pertains to his confidence, then we should see growth. We should see elevation.
100% spot on. Obviously, health is the most crucial factor in him having a successful season.
And I think it relates to team as well. But we'll get to D-Rock, and I think we've hit some of D-Rock's questions already. But we've done the strengths and weaknesses, but we'll get to what determines his value to us.
That's a great question. I think that's like a deeper question about how do you gauge the value of an NBA player? I think his value is, scoring for the team offensively and being a great defender defensively. And then he can do some of the little things offensively too, like cutting to the basket, knocking down your 3-point shot. So I think his value is being a scorer, someone who can run the pick and roll, and then also somebody who can throw in the other team's best, probably offensive wing, and expect them to kind of slow them down or at least make their life difficult.
Yeah, I think looking off the court, I sort of thought about this, because we know about everything, but we know that Caris is the perfect teammate. We know how friendly he is, we know how warm he is, we know how personable he is, just from everything we see and we know about him, and we know how he literally doesn't have an ego. There is no ego in Caris LeVert. He is more than happy to be coached. He's more than happy to cede to the other guys and let them have their shine. So I think that his value as the third guy in that sort of role, I think is tremendous. So for me, that's how I look at the question, because we know, and every listener that is listening right now knows how great he is on the court. I think that it's worth touching the fact that he is one of the best guys and is almost epitomizes everything about the Brooklyn Nets that is great off the court.
No, that's an excellent point, Jack. And I think he provides the value not only as just being a great teammate, but somebody who's kind of helped turn the Nets culture around. And it's kind of, I think Kenny and Sean has referred to him as their baby, because he was really their first draft pick. And he's kind of everything you want in a player on and off the court, because he works so hard and he's great with everyone in the organization. And he's a guy who's
Absolutely.
willing to listen to the vets too, which I think will help him having Kyrie and KD around.
Definitely, definitely. An all-star. Can we see Caris LeVert as an all-star in 2019-20?
Yeah, I think we could. I don't think I'm willing to lock it in. I think we might have discussed this on a previous show, but I think it's a real possibility this year, especially if the Nets are having a lot of success. You know, if you're not a great team, you're probably not going to get two All-Stars. We already know Kyrie Irving is most likely a lock. So the Nets are going to have to be putting up some good numbers and probably be one of those top 5 teams in the East for Caris LeVert to probably get in there.
I would say they'd have to be a top 3 team before the All-Star break for him to get in there. But if the Nets are sort of shining and, you know, garnering the same amount of buzz as we learned last season, but on a more national scale rather than sort of under the radar love every now and then, and the Nets sort of establish themselves because we have the superstar talent, you know, then Caris LeVert, and you're naturally sort of going to get that shine. So I think he can be an All-Star. I'll probably put it 25% chance of that happening. Do you have a percentage number? I know you love your percentages, Nick.
Let's go through the guards in the East and then let's make our percentages. Let's give a good dive in. So we got Kyrie as a lock.
Yeah.
Who else are we locking in the guard spots? Bradley Beal probably.
Bradley
Kemba
Beal
Walker.
Kemba Walker. Is Jimmy Butler considered a guard these days?
That's a great question. That is a great question. I'm not sure if he's going to play guard or small forward. But
And isn't Ben Simmons considered? What is Ben Simmons still considered a guard in the All-Star sort of voting? That's like the thing for me. Like, what do they consider? Are they forwards or guards? Because like Caris LeVert as well, forward or guard. Obviously, he'd most likely be considered as a guard. But you had
it
Kyle
won't
Lowry as
quite
well.
matter as much because I think the positional voting will only matter for the starters, where the bench unit is picked on differently and it's not based off of voting as much.
Yeah.
So I think they'll be able to get away with having just the best available guys.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Hey, Lowry's an interesting one.
I think that Toronto are a strong enough fan base, a very strong fan base, that if they are what we sort of want to be in that sort of 3rd seed range and they're really dominating, then I could really see Pascal and Kyle Lowry getting the love. And I think from the sort of coaches, sort of where the coaches come into play, they love giving the love to the vets and the guys who have been around the wings a little bit. So I think Kyle Lowry is a likely sort of pick. I think that if we're talking about guys, Caris LeVert could be around the sort of range of, Eric Bledsoe sort of type, where it's sort of like D'Angelo Russell was last season, is sort of an injury replacement. I don't think it's going to be, unless he has this absolutely outstanding season and puts it all together. Who knows? We want that to happen, but thinking realistically, I think he's probably likely as an injury replacement or that sort of 15th guy, 24th guy, or 12th guy sort of picked on the roster.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you brought up about Lowry and Siakam. I could see the difference being whoever has more wins at that point is the team that's getting, the 2 All-Stars. Being that like maybe the Raptors don't get 2 if they're not having a successful season. There's also a small possibility that Kyle Lowry's traded at that time. Like we've done the Raptors preview with Nick Cuvallo and Tim Hanna, and they were talking about the discussion. Hey, they might trade their vets away, and now obviously Toronto's in a bad position. I think Siakam would definitely still make it, but Lowry might not even be in town, so that could open up a spot. And obviously, knock on wood, there's always injuries too. So I think I'm looking at 40% because I also think this is a good year for Caris to maybe get in the All-Star game because his offensive workload should still be relatively high. Because maybe next season you might see some of those offensive numbers drop when Kevin Durant's back for the full year.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that if we're talking about striking while the iron is hot, I think that now is probably the best time. And a guy that I'll throw in there, or in terms of like fan vote, Derrick Rose is going to get the fan vote. But a guy that I think legitimately has a shot, and especially if they're a team that is fighting for a playoff position, is Trae Young. I think that he has such a tremendous fan base, individual fan base already. And if the Hawks are exceeding expectations, him and John Collins leading the way, Trae's going to get some love.
Yeah, and he puts up the numbers. He just has some major pop to his game, and obviously a lot's going to probably depend on Atlanta's success, but that's a great name to throw in there too. So I'll put it at 40%, but let's hit another question, Jack.
Yeah, so let's get to the next one. The next one is best playing the 2 or the 3 from D-Rock.
I personally think he's best playing the 2 because he's not undersized and he has the quickness to match up with other 2s, and he probably has a little bit of a physical advantage over some guys at the 2 spot. So I think physically I prefer him to be at the 2. Now,
Nick, this is where it's going to surprise you. This is where I come in with my basketball reference, the one that everyone has been waiting for, where the position estimate by basketball reference has him last season playing only 8% of his time, the least amount of his career, at the 2 spot.
And I think some of that's basketball reference.
Right.
just kind of doing their percentages, because let's go back and look at some games. You look at the stuck out is like the big shooting guard matchup with Drew Holiday, the entire New Orleans game. Drew Holiday matched up with him against the Pacers, Oladipo on both ends of the floor. So I think he's really played the two guard spot. Maybe sometimes in the lineup they might consider Joe Harris the two and Caris LeVert the three. But I think two wise, it just makes more sense in my eyes. And obviously matchups always matter in the NBA too.
And something that's weird to me is that he spent 16% at power forward last season, according to them, which is surprising. I think that we sort of touched
I
on
wonder
it a
if they
little bit.
might do it based off of height, and he might have been like, maybe the tallest or tied for the tallest on the floor or something like that, because he definitely didn't play 16% at power forward. At least I don't think so.
It'd be interesting. Basketball Reference, hit us up. But 77% at the small forward, apparently, it says here. But if you're adding up those numbers, it equals 101% as well. So Basketball Reference, get your numbers right. But I think that as a three, he can be really capable, because if we're talking about we've talked about the three guard lineups last season, at length, but this season it's almost even more intriguing because we have a guy who's incredibly effective, like Kyrie Irving, as a scorer. And if you're looking at Kyrie, Spencer, Caris, if you're seeing that as a possible closing lineup, then Caris is the three in that. So
I think also like the way you look at his three, because we look at closing lineups, a lot of times teams play down where they might play 2 point guards or they might play 2 shooting guards. And it's more so he's just out on the top of the wing defending whoever's there. Like Eric Gordon's going to play minutes at the three for Houston, and obviously Caris LeVert can easily match up with him size-wise.
I think the intriguing thing about talking about the sort of forward and guard position is that, is Caris LeVert going to be good enough, strong enough to guard the likes of LeBron James in closing possessions, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George? I think Paul George is probably a guy who's almost similar in Caris LeVert in the fact that, but he has probably a bit more strength and maybe a couple of inches to play up that little bit more. I think that's the prototype that hopefully Caris can become. But obviously, he is a guard/forward, but does he have the acumen to play that little bit higher, like we sort of touched on with the power forward thing? If we wanted to be our best defender, you generally have your best defender guard the other guys, and it doesn't necessarily matter what height they are. Patrick Beverley was guarding Kevin Durant for an extended periods in their sort of playoff series, and he was pretty effective at times, but then KD just did his thing. So KD's almost unguardable at points, but I'll be intrigued to see.
On the Nets.
Very, very happy that number 7 is on the Nets. But I'll be intrigued to see in terms of defensively how he is used against the likes of Kawhi Leonard and these sort of superstars at the wings.
And that's a great point, too, talking about the four. I know DeMarre Carroll, maybe last year in an interview or the year before, talked about how he thinks Caris, as he gets older, will be able to play some minutes in terms of defending the four. And if he's able to defend positions 1 through 4, that just adds to the switchability you have as your team, especially with guys like Taurean Prince and Rodion Krujci out there. So I think that is something to keep an eye on, too, defensively. We talked about the on-ball stuff, the steals and stuff, but his ability to switch on some fours in this league will also really help the Nets.
Oh, absolutely. And we've touched on what he needs to flourish on both sides of the ball. We'll finish with D-Rock's last questions. Which players has he struggled against most? And I remember talking to you in the DMs trying to talk about this, and you came up with some great names.
Yeah, I mean, Drew Holiday was a guy that definitely, slowed him down defensively, Victor Oladipo. But then if you look at those games, I think one thing that really stuck out positively, even when he's getting slowed down a little bit offensively, he's still having an impact on the game, either defensively or some hustle plays. So I think guys do a good job of getting into him and maybe taking him as offense a little bit, but he's still able to provide an impact to the game, which I think is crucial for an NBA player.
Yeah, and I remember speaking to you in terms of the fact that which players he struggled against most. It sort of relates most to himself and his own confidence. I think that he can be his own worst enemy a lot of the time, like a lot of players. These players are incredibly capable and can get their own shot and can do anything on the basketball court. But, your inner demons and your inner sort of self-worth and the sort of ticking clock that's happening in the brain and the inner chatter is almost the worst enemy, because we know how good he is and he can get his own shot. He was doing it against some incredible defenders on one of the best defensive teams in the Philadelphia 76ers in the playoffs. So I think that he's almost, rather than other players, it's almost Caris LeVert himself that he struggled against most. Even
his shooting consistency, really. That's what he struggled against the most. And when he shoots well, his game's completely different, because now people are coming out to the three-point line. If he's not knocking down those shots, now he's playing with a little bit of a cushion, a little bit harder to get to the rim where he wants to go.
Definitely. We'll get to another question from Nick Boylan, at Nick J. Boylan, from OTGBasketball.com, by the way. How do you think Kyrie and Caris will work together as opposed to D'Lo and Caris?
And you mentioned this early, Caris and D'Lo didn't necessarily have the best chemistry. Off the court, they were friends and they've known each other for quite some time. And we kind of saw some chemistry develop pre-injury, but then obviously that all changed, and D'Angelo's role in the change dramatically changed after that too. So I like the fact that Kyrie and Caris are spending a lot of time together, and we kind of talked about the defensive impact Caris can have, and that's great for a guy next to Kyrie. So far, I think they're going to work a little bit better, but obviously we have to see it on the court.
Yeah, I looked up the advanced stats. So together as a two-man lineup, they had a 108.4 offensive rating and a 109.7 defensive rating, so a negative 1.3, Russell and LeVert. So efficiency-wise, I think Kyrie and Caris should be better, because I think Kyrie himself is always going to be effective no matter who he's with generally, unless it's, some scrubs. But the key, like you sort of said, is building chemistry. They didn't have that time a lot of, D'Angelo and Caris was always very much interrupted. It would be like, they're back, but then it's like, oh, well, D'Lo has a couple of games off, or Caris is managing an injury. So I think more than anything, like you sort of said, off the court, that pertains to time. But then on the court, just being able to play together and figure stuff out. And obviously training camp is coming up soon, and then the preseason games when we head to China. I think all those sort of things are going to be invaluable to building that chemistry. And I think that they will be more effective, just because looking at it, Kyrie's a better player than D'Angelo Russell. And I think he makes players better around him, just purely and simply because of that fact. Not to say that D'Angelo doesn't, because he gets guys really good shots and is a great passer. But I think as a two-man duo, I think that they're going to work that a little bit better together.
In one area that just sticks out, Kyrie's a better off-ball player than D'Angelo, who doesn't really do a ton off-ball. So I think that'll really help Caris too.
Yeah, and I think Kyrie is a better driver than
Yep.
D'Angelo Russell. I think that's pretty easy, and one of the best, most creative drivers and finishers in the game. So I think that being able to create each other space in a lot of ways, we know how good of a driver Caris is as well. So I think they're going to be able to create space for each other on the floor in terms of just offensively too.
Yeah, and just able to initiate the offense and get things moving where it's not like, okay, I need to break down my guy. He's already moving at this point. Now it's going to be a lot easier for me to get to the point I want to be at.
Definitely. We'll get to our boy Dwayne at DARQNYT27 at Dark Knight 27. A lot has been made about Kyrie's potential to screw up team chemistry, but not enough is made about Caris's ability as the consummate net to bring harmony. He's a friend of KD. He hangs out with Kyrie. Team speaks glowingly of his humble grit. What's your take on him being our proactive ambassador? My guy, Dwayne, that was one of the most eloquent and well put together questions. Love the words. Nick Busick and I love when guys use like fancy words and eloquent words. Like if you're using consummate and proactive, glowingly, all these sort of words, then you're going to be a star in my eyes. Dwayne, keep it up, man. You don't need that thesaurus.
Yeah, that is a great question. Well thought out as well. And we've kind of hinted at this earlier in the show, and I think this is why the Nets really believe in Caris, and they gave him that extension, even though there's probably some questions about his health and where he's going to be at. But we talked about it being kind of a steal contract. But what he provides the team off the court and being really a team leader, and we saw him kind of come to that role early on last season. It probably faded a little bit with the injury being away from the team a bit. But I think having him there, already having a relationship developing with Kyrie, knowing Kevin Durant in the past, and also he's gotten a lot of respect, I think, from NBA players. I think Jimmy Butler, after a press conference, said, like, that boy can ball. And, like, Jimmy Butler is not one to really praise an opposing player. So I think Caris is also getting some respect around the league, and that should really help him with the new teammates and really help that whole Kyrie storyline.
Yeah, it certainly will. I think that, we speak about Spencer Dinwiddie in relation to Kyrie Irving a lot, because it seems as if he was one of the more proactive guys in terms of landing him. Obviously they had the established relationship, going to the business school at Harvard together. But Caris, just by who he is as a person, like you sort of said, and like Dwayne sort of said, just the humility that he possesses, just the low ego, the low maintenance sort of style that he has. I think that you just need, for the locker room dynamics, you need those sort of guys. And because you have that sort of guy who has a tremendous level of talent, it just fits in perfectly. I think that he is going to bring things together in an underrated sort of aspect, as Dwayne sort of spoken about. I think that for chemistry and on-court chemistry to occur, and we're going to speak about this in one of the news podcasts, and probably by the time this comes out, we would have discussed it. Chemistry is a hard thing to sort of figure out, and it's not necessarily something you can go, oh, well, we need 3 shooters and 2 defensive guys, whatever. It's not an on-court sort of thing. It just sort of happens. And, we saw how it can explode and implode in Boston, but we also saw it with our own team in the Brooklyn Nets, how that harmonious team chemistry can get you an extra 5 to 10 wins and sort of increase your level as a team just because you guys are just so close and so in sync. And I think Caris is going to be a really key component to that when Kyrie is doing his thing and establishing himself as a leader, and when KD gets back too, because I think that he has this sort of mentality that he's going to be cool either way. I'm happy taking a step back. I'm happy when I need to step up. Obviously, you want some consistency in role. And I think in the past, when it's related to Spencer Dinwiddie, that inconsistency has led to some inconsistencies in form. So I think you want to try and make it as easy as possible for him to be as successful as he can. But just who he is, it's going to be really positive for the Nets, no matter what, however long he is on this Nets team.
Yeah, he just seems like a really likable guy. And in comparison, one of the guys who Kyrie didn't get along with, the shooting guard Jaylen Brown, has more of an aggressive personality. And like you said, Caris is more of this humble guy that doesn't really have an ego. So I think he's just going to fit well. And I think you mentioned like him being okay taking a step back. And I think some of that comes with his game because he's like, all right, if I have to take a step back offensively, I can provide more defensively. So having different avenues to attack the game allows you to be more comfortable in your role.
Definitely. And a final question from another OTG writer, @_Charles Allen. Charles, what will it look like for LeVert when KD comes back? Will it limit his potential / development? Could it eat into his minutes?
I definitely don't think it'll eat into his minutes because I think KD's going to be probably playing mostly the 4, maybe a little bit at the 3 at points. And I think Kenny even mentioned playing him some at the 5 and the 1. So I think it won't really impact Caris's minutes because he's one of the best players in this team. Could it limit him a little bit in terms of potential offensively? Maybe, but he's going to have pretty much most of this year until KD comes back to kind of develop those skills and kind of become the player he needs to become. But like we talked about, there's not necessarily a ton of areas for him to improve to become this amazing player. It's pretty simple. 3-point percentage, free throw percentage, off-ball presence, and just continuing to, pick up on the little things, including like basketball IQ.
Yeah, you'd like to think that having talent around you doesn't necessarily hinder your development because we know, I think that there is a potential where it could be. I think it's certainly a worthwhile question asking, but Caris isn't necessarily a rookie and early or a sophomore anymore. He's established himself as a player, and yes, he still has some growth left to do, despite the fact that he's only, 24. Despite the fact that he is 24, 25 years old. I know that you've said this at length on numerous pods about Caris, the fact that he hasn't had the development time in college, he hasn't had a lot of on-court time in comparison to a lot of other sort of younger guys who have played heaps of games at college and high school and the like. So Caris is still growing as a player. But I don't think it's going to stunt his development at all. I think hopefully it should affect his efficiency in a positive manner. And like you said, the fact that, KD isn't going to be back, if at all, until the latter points of the season. So if he's got 60, 65 games with Kyrie, they've got an embedded chemistry, an embedded sort of on-court and off-court chemistry, then all you have to do is work in the fact of Kevin Durant, one of the most efficient scorers in the history of the game, and the guy who can literally score at will from any point of the court and can play some really good defense too. I think it's going to only make things better. And if you have KD as a high-level defender still, having Kevin Durant and Caris LeVert, two incredibly long guys and defenders that can really impact positively. It's weird. I'm probably more intrigued to see KD and Caris than Kyrie and Caris, which is probably maybe because I just love KD and I've profused my love about him before. Not to say I don't love Kyrie, and I think it's more the fact that Kyrie and Caris is going to be a thing. That's probably a number one thing in terms of how successful the Nets are early season, mid season, and postseason, because these guys are going to be the two best players for the large chunks of the season. But I'm really excited to see KD and Caris when they are in the court together.
You want to see KD and baby KD?
KD and baby KD.
I mean, that is really intriguing. And I think one thing that really bodes well, we talked about Kyrie and LeVert developing the relationship, but KD and LeVert have worked out in the past, and it kind of tells you that LeVert obviously has a high respect for Kevin Durant and is going to take things away from him. He's one of the best offensive players to ever play in the NBA, and this is a guy who's becoming a star. Obviously, I think Kevin Durant's going to be able to give him some pointers to help him improve his game.
Yeah, I think that as a coach off the court, we know, we've heard the sound bites of how intelligent he is as a player. Imagine him imparting that wisdom to our guy Caris. So it's like, look, you got to move your foot a little bit here. We've heard Kobe Bryant speak about how he could defend Kevin Durant easily because he just knew what he was moving into. These basketball players right now are probably the smartest in the history of the sport. They are savants of the game. They are dedicated to their craft. They're obsessed with their craft. And then Kobe was like, then he just had this counter move, and I just couldn't guard him anymore. He moved to his left, and then he would move to his right. Now he just moves to both sides. So I think KD already knows what Caris is like as a player. Obviously, they've worked out together. So I think spending that time together on road trips and at home, he's going to be able to go to him, look, Caris, you look a little bit wonky here, or your mechanics look a little bit like this here. And obviously the assistant coaches have their role in that, and have had an incredible impact on Caris already. But, adding another coach and a guy with, the amount of intelligence and the amount of history that Kevin Durant has had, I'm excited to see how all those guys can impart their wisdom. I think we're naturally more positive, but there is, conversely, he could get maybe 1 or 2 minutes less. That could affect his, just general mentality. I don't think it will, because I think if we're looking at it, that's more likely to be a case with Jared Allen and DeAndre Jordan. But in terms of, limiting his development, he might not have the ball in his hands as much, because I would rather have the ball in Kyrie and KD's hand a lot. But if you need to, Caris is there as an option. So I think that there is a low downside scenario to the limiting of the development of Caris as he continues to establish himself.
Yeah, and I think some of that, too, is going to fall in the coaching. We talked about staggering the minutes early on. How does that impact things about who's getting touches here and there and keeping guys 100% fresh? But like you said, we're positive. I think there's a lot of positives to take away that the media obviously doesn't talk about, because they want to point out more of the negative things. But I think there is really plenty of positive for some of these guys to help the Nets develop as players. And Durant, like you mentioned, one of the smartest guys in the league, helped Caris develop some of these counters. And he has fresh experience going against every player in the NBA except the rookie class.
Yeah, I mean, KD I think that, if we're talking about the smartest basketballs in the game, it's almost a cop-out. But Kevin Durant and, LeBron James are like, we remember when like LeBron James in a post-media conference was like recounting just these play-by-play plays. I think that the level of passion that he has for the game, we know that Caris has a real passion and confidence too, but you just feel that when you're hanging around that, and obviously an 82-game season is such a slog, and then you've got playoffs as well. You're naturally going to take on some of the traits and some of the love that those guys sort of pass on to you. But I think that we've done Kyrie, we've done Caris now. It's going to be interesting to see. Those two are the biggest guys, and like you sort of said, Nick, earlier in the pod, Caris's form could be the big determinant in how high the Nets finish in terms of their ceiling. It's going to be intriguing to see.
And Jack, do we have one more question, I think?
Oh, yes. Do you want to get that one? Because I forgot to put it in my doc, I don't think.
Yeah, your boy's going to be disrespected. K-Wald Hoops, Corey Waldron, obviously my co-host on the NBA Outlet.
He didn't comment on mine. He commented on your tweet.
No, it's on yours. It's on yours.
Oh, I think it makes sense that I forget Corey's question because of the embedded beef that we supposedly have.
Obviously, we're actually dropping a Nets preview this week with Corey on the NBA Outlet. Corey and I are doing an NBA Outlet preview series. Jack's on there a couple times as well. But getting to his question, what does Caris LeVert's fullest potential look like? Multi-time All-Star, All-NBA teams, question mark, question mark.
Yeah, I think All-NBA team, it's a good question from Corey. And despite the fact that I supposedly hate him, he's one of the smartest guys and most passionate guys when it comes to the NBA world. I think All-NBA team maybe fringe levels. I think multi-time All-Star is probably the sort of thing, maybe if you're looking like an Andre Iguodala type, a Drew Holiday sort of type, guys that can make the All-Star team regularly, but are just not in there because of the fan vote or because there's just an element of saturated talent. So, by the end of his career, I would hope that Caris has made 2 or 3 All-Star teams, maybe his third team All-NBA. But I think to be one of the 6 best guards in the NBA, I think that's going to be Caris' ceiling. And I think because of the amount of talent right now, Kyrie's still young. There's guys on the rise like Donovan Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox. I think Caris is still somewhat of a rung under them, but I think he can be a real all-timer for this Brooklyn Nets squad.
Yeah, I agree. I think fringe third team All-NBA is probably his ceiling. You brought this up probably, I think, 2 years ago. A great comparison for Caris LeVert is Drew Holiday, and we saw him play at a crazy high level, and I don't believe he made third team All-NBA. Obviously, the Pelicans weren't very good, but it's definitely tough to get in there. And then I think multi-time All-Star, probably 3 appearances if things go really well, maybe as many as, 4 or 5. But would you say it's more likely he's to make an all-defensive team than an All-NBA third team?
Yes. I think he is a better defender than he is, his talent holistically overall, because I think that there are some defenders in the NBA right now that are probably going to begin to age, whereas I think Caris hasn't even reached his defensive potential yet. I think that he's closer to reaching his offensive potential, but his defensive potential, like I sort of said earlier in the episode, I'm so excited to see.
Yeah, because you see some of the instincts there. Now it's kind of developing some more of the experience. And then also, I think physically continuing to get stronger. We saw a major jump in his strength last season, especially with the finishing. And I think that helps you defensively, just having a stronger base. So as he continues to grow, I think defensively there's a lot of improvement left.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Jack, anything else you want to touch on before we get out of here?
No, thank you to every person who had a question. And thanks to everyone who even listens to me speak about Caris LeVert for more than 5 minutes.
I appreciate it. Obviously, Caris LeVert is going to be a guy that we talk about a lot this season. Like Jack said, we appreciate the questions. We're going to continue to go through the player season previews and continue to ask you guys for questions on Twitter. Jack, tell them where they can find you.
I am at the J-Man JBT, also co-host of JBT podcast. And like Nick said, I'm going to be on the outlet plenty of times, including the Nets season preview.
And you can find me on Twitter at OTG_Nick. Also find OTG at OTG Basketball. And obviously the show on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, NetsRepublic.com, Google Play, YouTube, and obviously OTGBasketball.com. And also make sure subscribe, review. Ratings are very much appreciated.